It's going to be quite a few case notes here, consecutive case notes, and it's going to go on for a little while. Citation 231 is a repeat. We covered June 2nd, 2005, that entry of case notes previously. It pops back up here again. So, yeah, it's the June 2nd, 2005 entry of the case notes of Detective Corey Williams. I interviewed Isaiah Ike McKinnon today, the ex-chief of police in Detroit, about Richard Lawson. Lawson had stated during earlier interviews that he had worked as an informant for Ike during the original OCCK investigation. Chief McKinnon told me that he was in charge of the Detroit Police Sex Crimes Unit at that time, and they were working on the child killing case. I was expecting Ike to say that Richard is not a credible person, don't believe anything he says, but McKinnon had the opposite to say about Lawson. He said that Richard is a full-blown pedophile, was an excellent snitch, and helped his crew arrest over 20 pedophiles working the Woodward and 6 Mile area at the time of the OCCK investigation in an attempt to locate the child killer. Ike said that Richard is long-winded, but that if I can get him to open up about his pedophilia and past criminal activity, that Lawson would be a wealth of information and may help close unsolved crimes, including murders. The chief went on to say that they used Lawson to teach officers about pedophiles and pedophilia, and that Lawson went on the news in the 1970s to give his opinion about the child killer. I asked Ike if he or anyone in his crew would have shown Lawson, or if Lawson would have had access to any photographs of the dead kids from the investigation, to which McKinnon stated absolutely not. Ike said that Richard was well connected in the pedophile network in several states and led his crew to a raid in Detroit that yielded files of thousands of pedophiles' names around the country. I asked McKinnon, knowing everything he now knows about Richard Lawson, would he put it past Lawson to have been involved in the Oakland County child killings, to which he stated absolutely not. McKinnon reiterated that if I can get Lawson talking, he would be a wealth of information, stating that Lawson was connected to and kept files on pedophiles in not only Detroit, but also places like Chicago, Indianapolis, New York, etc. I asked McKinnon about the David Schultz arrest, to which he said that when his crew arrested Schultz, they thought he was going to be the Oakland County child killer. McKinnon said that Lawson was the informant on the Schultz case. Schultz was then cleared in the OCCK case. Citation 232, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 13th, 2005. I met with John Owlett today after having an opportunity the night before to read over all the new information on Sheldon, Goddick, and Filger. The only connection so far between Lawson and Francis Sheldon's pedophile ring is that Lawson talked about Sheldon financing the film of Timothy King, produced by Bob Moore. Lawson told detectives this during the interview in 1988, after he contacted Timothy King's father from the Macomb County Jail, stating that he knew who killed his son. John and I agree that the motive behind the kidnappings and killings was probably the money the suspects were getting for filming and selling the snuff films of these children. In 1979, Sheldon fled Michigan to Spain to avoid prosecution on 3 CSC counts of children under the age of 13. Sheldon transferred $2 million from his trust to an offshore account in the Virgin Islands. The money that was coming in producing child porn movies had probably dried up. Richard Lawson, Bob Moore, and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr, all parted ways. Ted moved to Cleveland. Richard no longer had the money to put into his Detroit rental homes and torched one for insurance money. Prior to this, according to Fay Redacted, Richard was putting money into his Detroit properties, fixing them up and selling them. Richard and Fay moved into Ted's apartment at Junction and Porter, and Ted would lend Richard money when Ted came into town from Cleveland. This is just a theory at this point, but it would explain why the kidnappings and killings stopped. Ted, Richard, and Bob never stopped molesting children. John Owlett and I are continuing to pore over the new information on Sheldon to look for other connections to the Cass Corridor pedophile ring. John is also going to check FBI files and databases for anything that would connect all the dots in this promising lead. John told me that he would contact their legal attaché in Amsterdam to ascertain whether or not the authorities there had any archives of tapes or movies obtained from Francis Sheldon during search warrants or after his death. Citation 233. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 9th, 2005. In the report that John Owlett of the FBI found from the interview of Lawson in 1988, Lawson has said that a wealthy pedophile named Sheldon was the guy who financed the pornographic movies that Bob Moore was making in Detroit involving children. Lawson said that Sheldon owned an island in northern Michigan off the coast, in the Traverse City area, and fled the country, probably to Spain, and is still involved in child pornography internationally. This morning, Gary Gray called me and stated that a detective in the Traverse City area contacted him after the request, stating that Sheldon is Francis Duffield Sheldon, white male, born September 5, 1928. Gary then found a large MSP tip on Francis Sheldon that includes the information from Lawson about being wealthy, leaving the country to avoid prosecution, and being involved in the child pornography industry. Citation 234. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 15, 2006. Today we obtained a writ and took Richard Lawson out of the Wayne County Jail after he indicated that he wished to cooperate in the OCCK investigation in exchange for consideration in his case. We had a proffer statement down up by the prosecutor's office that contained the terms of the agreement. This proffer statement was approved by Kim Worthy, Rob Moran, and Lawson's attorneys. Lawson also agreed to the terms of the offer and signed the statement. Lawson understood that he had to give a complete debriefing about information he has on the OCCK case and be polygraphed about his personal involvement and/or information he has about the case. The interview of Lawson was conducted by Sergeant Williams, Gary Gray, and John Owlett. During the course of this lengthy interview with Lawson, it was determined that the only information Lawson might have that could assist the investigation is that he claims to have looked at 2 Polaroid photos of Timothy King alive, standing naked, and another adult male is standing in the photo with the King boy. Richard said that he was at Bob Moore's house at the time Ted Lamborghini showed him these photos, stating in a bragging kind of way, "Looks like the King kid." Richard said that Bob Moore became upset when he noticed Ted showing Richard these photos. Richard told detectives that he thought it looked like the King boy, but that he wasn't sure. See John Owlett's narrative of this interview for details. Richard will be polygraphed on February 16, 2006. To my knowledge, there's no publicly released transcript of this lengthy interview of Lawson, but God, that would be unbelievable to actually read. Citation 235. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 16, 2006. We took Richard to his polygraph today at the Michigan State Police Post in Northville, Michigan. In the car, on the way from Wayne County Jail to the test, Lawson said that he had an opportunity to think last night and that he remembered the name of the subject he called number 1 in the 1988 interview report. Lawson also said that if the picture Ted showed him was in fact of Timothy King, then he knows who the Oakland County child killer is, and the guy in the photo with the King boy is the accomplice. Richard told me that he knows that guy's name and that he is still alive today. Richard indicated that he was not going to reveal these 2 names to me yet. When we arrived at the polygraph, Lawson indicated that he wanted to talk to his attorney first, before he takes the test. I called and spoke to Jim O'Donnell and handed the phone to Richard, who spoke to O'Donnell. O'Donnell agreed to send his assistant, Kim Meishen, out to the polygraph to speak with Richard. After Richard and Kim Meishen had a chance to talk, Richard asked me to meet with he and Kim. Richard asked Kim to tell me whether or not he told her the name of the guy in the photo with Timothy King and whether or not it would help solve the case. Kim Meishen answered yes. Kim Meishen then looked over the terms of the proffer statement and agreed that they were satisfactory to her and Richard Lawson. Kim was given an opportunity to sign the form and refused, stating that Jim O'Donnell agreed to it verbally yesterday. That is fine with me. The polygraph test was then conducted on Lawson, and the questions asked were as follows. Question number 1. In 1976 to 77, did you participate in killing any of those kids from Oakland County? Lawson answers no. Question number 2. Were you present when any of those kids were killed? Lawson answers no. Question number 3. Did you see anyone kill any of those kids in 1976 to 77, in Oakland County? Lawson answers no. Question number 4. Outside the photograph, do you know for sure who killed any of those kids? Lawson answers no. Report, it is the opinion of the polygraph examiner, based on the examination given, that this subject is being truthful in regards to this issue. After the polygraph, Richard was advised that he passed, and that we now know that, other than the name of the guy in the supposed photo with Timothy King, he has nothing else to offer detectives that could possibly assist them in the investigation. Richard seeing the photos shown to him by Ted Lamborghini in 1977, and Ted now knowing that Richard is in jail for murder and talking to us, would explain why Ted is so afraid of Richard. I advise Richard that if he supplies detectives with the names, we will investigate this, and if it pans out and leads to an arrest or solving of the case, he would get credit and some consideration on his charges. I made it clear to Richard that we would have to have the names first, and that we are not interested in any more of his theories on the OCCK case. No kidding. Citation 236. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams. December 1st, 2005. We covered this one as well earlier back, but it comes up again. Meeting about information Lawson provided to investigators in 1988. Today I met with John Ellett from the FBI to discuss some new information that Ellett had found in the FBI files that relate to the Lawson-Moore-Lamborghini investigation. Present at this meeting was John and I, Gary Gray, Dave Robertson, and Ray Anger from Berkeley PD. John found a report that had been written by Detective Stutt from the Birmingham Police Department back in 1988. This report showed that Barry King, Timothy King's father, had been contacted by Richard Lawson via telephone from the Macomb jail in 1988. Lawson was awaiting trial on a 4-count CSC, child under 13 case, at the time. Lawson told Mr. King that he knew who killed his son. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, had to take a drink of water. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, and Barry King went to the Macomb County Jail and interviewed Richard Lawson. During this interview, Lawson described a subject named Sheldon and 3 unnamed subjects as having been involved in a child pornography ring in the Cass Corridor in the mid to late 70s. Lawson also stated that these subjects were also involved in the OCCK case. Lawson stated that the King boy was also possibly filmed by these subjects before he was killed. This report contained information from Lawson that mirrors the information that I have gathered over the past 10 months in this case, minus the names. Lawson called these suspects numbers 1, 2, and 3 and gave descriptions to detectives during this 1988 interview. These descriptions given by Lawson for 2 and 3 matched Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. The subject called number 1 by Lawson has not been identified. Lawson then asked for an immunity on over 20 years of pedophilia by him. Lawson's criminal sexual conduct case was dismissed, and this information was never followed up on. A subject named George McMahon was also mentioned in this report as being associated with this child pornography ring and having been a supplier of children to Bob Moore for filming. Lawson said in this interview that he didn't think that George McMahon had anything to do with the King killing. I met with Tom Yesler from the FBI today and briefed him and gave him surveillance workup sheets for the crew who are scheduled to follow Lamborghini in Cleveland from Monday, December 5th, 2005 through Wednesday, December 7th. The Michigan State Police surveillance crew is then going to follow Lamborghini from Thursday, December 8th through Sunday, December 11th. Citation 237. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams. November 27th, 2006. Theory about Ted and Duffy. After interviewing Greg Redacted in Tennessee, we are theorizing that Lawson was very close to putting the OCCK case together, but just couldn't prove it, and that's why Lawson passed the polygraph when asked the question, do you know for sure who killed the kids from Oakland County in 76 to 77? The reason Ted appeared to be afraid of Richard was because Ted wasn't sure if Richard had put all the pieces together or not, but was fairly certain he had, and Duffy may have even told Ted that he, Duffy, had run his mouth to Lawson about the killings or seeing the King boy in a movie or picture. This would explain why Ted was surprised when we told him that Richard passed the polygraph. Lawson may have even told Ted that he knew what he had done. Ted was probably relieved when he heard that Lawson had passed. Ted had been afraid of Lawson for 30 years until we told him about Lawson passing the polygraph. During the interview of Greg Redacted, said that Ted's friend Duffy, black male since deceased, was frequenting poker games near the Wonder Bread plant in Detroit in the mid to late 70s. Lawson was also frequenting this same poker game where they would share pedophile stories about kids. Fay confirmed this along with the 1988 report when Lawson called Timothy King's father at home and told him that he knows who killed his son. Lawson was pretty sure he knew, again, but couldn't prove it. In this report, Lawson told Detective Stutt from Birmingham PD that he met the person he described in the report as number 1 at a poker game. Lawson described these subjects as 1, 2, and 3, and told detectives that he believed these to be the people responsible for the killing of Timothy King and possibly the others. Lawson also told detectives in the 1988 report that number 1 was high on cocaine one night at a poker game and told Lawson that he had seen a child porn movie with Timothy King in it. When Lawson asked 1 about this the other day, 1 denied ever saying that. If number 1 is Duffy, then that could possibly explain why Ted thought that Lawson knew. Duffy may have even told Ted that he ran his mouth at the poker game about the King boy, and Lawson asked him about it the next day. I've already identified numbers 2 and 3 when we found that report. Number 2 is Bob Moore, number 3 is Ted Lamborghini. We believe now that number 1 could possibly be Ted's friend Duffy. See 1988 FBI report on interview of Richard Lawson at the Macomb County Jail for details. Greg Redacted told detectives during his interview in Tennessee that Ted and Duffy would take kids out to other pedophiles' homes in the Royal Oak area in the mid-1970s. The pedophiles would swap kids, and at one point Ted threatened to kill the kids if they said anything. Redacted said that he walked in one time on Duffy and Michael Redacted, and that Duffy was performing anal sex on Michael Redacted. This would all make sense out of the fact that Ted was allowing Richard Lawson and Fay Redacted to stay in his apartment at Junction and Porter for free in the late 70s to early 80s after Ted moved to Cleveland. Fay had told me a while ago during earlier interviews that Richard was also getting money from Ted when Ted would occasionally come to Detroit after moving to Cleveland. Both citations 238 and 239 are the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 7th, 2007. FBI report from the Dutch police in Amsterdam today. Approximately a year and a half ago, John Owlett of the FBI forwarded a request to the FBI and Dutch police in Amsterdam to pursue a possible connection between a large distributor of child pornography in Amsterdam, according to Lawson, named Kim, Francis Sheldon, and the possibility of a connection with the Oakland County child killings. Lawson had told authorities in 1988, when he was facing life in prison for child molestation, that he had arrived to Amsterdam in 1979 and had a conversation with this Kim. Lawson said that Kim named Francis Sheldon and number 1 by name as having involvement in the abduction and murder of Timothy King. It's unbelievable that this is actually written out here. Like, it's just mind-blowing. Lawson had mentioned in the 1988 report that Francis Duffield Sheldon, pedophile from the southeast Michigan area, was the person who was financing the child porn photos and films in the Detroit area and shipping them to Amsterdam for distribution to the Eye of the Chickenhawk organization. Today, the FBI in Washington, D.C. forwarded a response they received from the Dutch police in Brussels in regards to our request. In this response, the Dutch authorities state that they compared all the photographs of our OCCK victims to photos and films they confiscated during a large child porn sting in Amsterdam in 1993, with negative results. However, they state that Kim was identified in the 1993 investigation as Kim Tam Ang, born April 16, 1933, a British national from Selangor, Malacca, living in Amsterdam. Ang was well known to Dutch police for child pornography and sexual abuse of minor boys in 1997. The Dutch police also provided that Francis Duffield Sheldon, white male born September 5, 1928, from Wayne County, Michigan, USA, died July 9, 1996, and he was also named in their investigation. Ang and Sheldon were both mentioned in an investigation by the Danish police in 1993 concerning child pornography and sexual offenses against minors. Danish police. This confirms Lawson's story. I wonder if he meant Dutch police. This confirms Lawson's story from Interpol. This report from International Operations in Brussels is in the FBI report binder. Citations 240 and 241, case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 14, 2007. Another interesting possibility is that Josiah Tazalar is the #1 subject that Lawson described to Barry King in the 1988 FBI report that we have been trying to identify. We had already known that #2 was Bob Moore and #3 was Ted from their descriptions in that report. #1 had told Lawson in the late 70s or early 80s that he had seen the King boy in a child porn movie. According to Lawson, #1 was living in the Highland Park area at that time and was named by Kim, the child porn magazine owner in Amsterdam, to Lawson in 1979, when Lawson was in Amsterdam, as having been involved in the killing of Timothy King. We've already confirmed that Lawson did in fact travel to Amsterdam in 1979, and according to Louise Hodgson, who interviewed in 1970s, when interviewed in 1977, Josiah makes trips abroad, indicating out of the country. Josiah is Dutch, and Amsterdam is the child porn capital. This is also where Francis Sheldon fled to in 1976 while under indictment. Francis Sheldon was a millionaire and was involved in financing child porn, just like Lawson had told me. Francis Sheldon's activities in Amsterdam and this Kim subject were both confirmed by the FBI stationed in Brussels. We had sent a lead to Brussels to check on this for us and received the positive response February 7, 2007. See details from FBI report from Brussels on February 7, 2007 for this information about Sheldon and Kim. Identified David Schultz today. Real name is Kent Gilbert Schultz, white male, born 1944. I was reading over the Francis Sheldon file tonight and observed a Kent Gilbert Schultz, born 1944, who resides at redacted Church Street, Highland Park, Michigan. We've been trying to identify the David Schultz that Lawson and Ike McKinnon talked about arresting in 1977, for child molestation in Highland Park. I knew David Schultz had lived in the house on Church Street near Woodward and Church behind the Methodist Church. I drove by there and observed that all the houses behind the church are gone. I knew the addresses would possibly be 19, 21, 23, etc. This Kent Gilbert Schultz at redacted Church Street matches what Lawson described for David Schultz. Citation 242. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 16, 2006, another repeat from earlier. We took Richard to his polygraph today at the Michigan State Police Post in Northville, Michigan. In the car, on the way from Wayne County Jail to the test, Lawson said that he had an opportunity to think last night and that he remembered the name of the subject he called #1 in the 1988 interview report. Lawson also said that if the picture Ted showed him was in fact of Timothy King, then he knows who the Oakland County child killer is, and the guy in the photo with the King boy is the accomplice. Richard told me that he knows the guy's name and that he's still alive today. Citation 243. Case notes of Corey Williams, February 9th, 2007. I identified William Tazalar today and his home in Birmingham, situated a few blocks from Timothy King's house. Tonight I was talking to Special Agent John Owlett, the FBI, about this 505 Golden Gate address in Highland Park that Taslar has. John and I thought it looks like from records that he may possibly still be maintaining or connected to that home, even though he is living in the apartments at 13 Mile and Woodward in Royal Oak. When I got off the phone, I ran Josiah Taslar through the AutoTrack computer system. This revealed that Josiah has also had a past address at 2762 Windmere in Birmingham, Michigan. I noticed that there were two people connected to Josiah, listed on the report as relatives. The first was a Willem Hendrik Taslar, born August 2nd, 1938, possibly a brother. The second was Ruth Taslar, born 1942, possibly sister-in-law. This computer check revealed that Willem and Ruth Taslar had lived at redacted Windmere in Birmingham, Michigan since 1969 to 2007. I put the redacted Windmere address into the MapQuest computer program, which revealed that the Taslars live and have lived in the same neighborhood approximately 3 to 6 blocks from the King family for many years. This Windmere Street is also one of the streets in that neighborhood that Pembroke Park is on. This appears to be the local park for that neighborhood. Also in the AutoTrack computer check, it shows Willem Taslar to be connected to and owner of Taslar Associates Architects. Upon further computer checks, I observed that Taslar's architectural business is currently located on 12 Mile Road in Southfield, Michigan. The check only shows back to 1993, and it appears as if the business was possibly located somewhere else prior to 93. I drove around the Maple Road and Adams Road area this afternoon and observed several 1950 to 60 style office buildings along Maple Road near the King family's home. I will be checking to see if the Taslars' business was possibly located in Birmingham near the King's home prior to their current Southfield location. Another repeat here, citation 244, case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 1st, 2005. Lawson was awaiting trial on a 4-count CSC charge at the time. Lawson told Mr. King that he knew who killed his son. Detective Stutt, Detective Duncan, and Barry King went to the Macomb County Jail and interviewed Richard Lawson. During this interview, Lawson described a subject named Sheldon and 3 unnamed subjects as having been involved in a child pornography ring in the Cass Corridor in the mid-to-late 70s. Lawson also stated that these subjects were also involved in the OCCK case. Lawson stated that the King boy was also possibly filmed by these subjects before he was killed. This report contained information from Lawson that mirrors the information that I have gathered over the past 10 months in this case, minus the names. Lawson called these suspects numbers 1, 2, 3, and gave descriptions to detectives during this 1988 interview. These descriptions given by Lawson for 2 and 3 matched Bob Moore and Ted Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. The subject called number 1 by Lawson has not been identified. Lawson then asked for immunity on over 20 years of pedophilia by him. Lawson's CSC case was dismissed and this information was never followed up on. Citation 245, case notes of Corey Williams, February 8, 2007. Ray Anger of Berkeley PD and I went to Josiah Taslar's apartment in Royal Oak today with some good polygraph dates in an attempt to set up a day to polygraph Taslar about the OCCK case. We were also going to ask him for consent to swab him for DNA. There was no answer at the door or on the speaker outside his building. I left my card in his door and requested that he contact me by phone. A phone call from Taslar informed me he had hired an attorney. Taslar found my card in his door and called me. I told him that I just wanted to set up a good time with him to run a few more names by him and show him a few photos. He told me that after we left his place the last time, he went and got a lawyer. I said, "A lawyer? We weren't accusing you of anything. We just talked about people from your past." He said, "I answered your questions." Taslar went on to say that anything we want to talk to him about or any contact with him from here on out has to go through his attorney. I asked for his attorney's name and phone number. Tasler told me that his name is Michael D. Elkins, and his number is 248-945-9800. I told Taslar that I would call Mr. Elkins and reminded him that when we left the last time, he said he would take a polygraph. Taslar said that he was reluctant then and said he wasn't going to do anything that his attorney advised him not to do. I asked Taslar if his attorney said it was okay to take the test, would he take it? He said, "You have to talk to my attorney." I told him that I would and we would be in touch with him. The phone call was terminated. Citation 246, Case Notes of Corey Williams, March 21st, 2007. Today, Rob Moran of Wayne County Prosecutor's Office Homicide Unit faxed me the letter of use immunity for Josiah Taslar. This letter is in regards to 3 specific 30-year-old CSCs committed by Josiah Taslar. The letter was signed by Elizabeth Walker, the Deputy Chief of Special Prosecutions at the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. I faxed a copy of the use immunity agreement to Michael Elkins' office. They called and confirmed that they had received it via fax. This is something else for 246. This is from the April 4th, 2007 entry. I spoke with Michael Elkins this afternoon about Josiah Taslar. Mr. Elkins indicated to me that he had a conversation with Josiah about this waiver and that Josiah told him that he didn't think his doctor was going to authorize a waiver to take a polygraph due to the condition of his heart. Mr. Elkins told me that he was not certain of that yet and would call me when he gets the doctor's determination in writing from Josiah. Sounds like Josiah came up with a good excuse not to take it, yeah. Citation 247, Case Notes of Detective Corey Williams, July 31st, 2006 entry. Info from David Taylor in Jackson Prison. Gary Gray called me today and said that he received a phone call and then a letter from the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office addressed to David Gorsica from an inmate in Jackson Prison named David Taylor. Supposedly, this Taylor subject, who fancies himself as a jailhouse lawyer, has become friends with Richard Lawson over the past few months. Taylor stated in his letter that Lawson has made statements and admissions to him about killing the kids from Oakland County years ago, and that he, Taylor, believes this information and wants to meet to give the information to a detective. Taylor supposedly did not ask for anything in return, but states that you have to draw a line when it comes to killing kids, and that he can't sleep at night. That certainly is a line. Taylor also said that Lawson told him about a plan he has to put the whole case on someone else. John, Gary, and I are going to meet on Wednesday to talk about this information from David Taylor and get a copy of the letter. I found him in the Michigan Department of Corrections database. He's identified as David Allen Taylor, a white male born November 4th, 1949. Taylor is currently serving 40 to 200 years for an armed robbery he committed in Rochester, Michigan back in 1985. Taylor had a long criminal history prior to that. I talked to Steve Scharschmidt from Parma Heights PD today about Ted Lamborghini. Steve told me that Ted had recently renewed his lease at the apartments in their city for another year, but that he has had no contact with Ted, even though he has called Ted's phone several times. I asked Steve and his partner, Wayne Mockler, under my direction to go interview Ted in an attempt to obtain an admission or confession from Ted about his sexual involvement with several young boy victims in the Detroit area back in the 70s. I faxed Steve a list of names of young boys that we have interviewed in the recent past that have told investigators that Ted paid them for sex when they were minors in the 70s in Detroit. I directed the Parma Heights detectives to review this interview with Ted Lamborghini. The Parma Heights detectives agreed to conduct and record the interview. At approximately 10 o'clock p.m. this evening, Detective Scharschmidt called me and stated that during the course of their interview with Ted, he admitted to having sex with several of the approximately 13 young boys named from the list that I had faxed to Detective Scharschmidt. Steve told me that Ted said he thought several of the young boys he had sex with were 14 to 15 years old. Let makes it better, I guess. See the transcripts from Parma Heights recorded interview of Ted Lamborghini for details. Transcripts and tape in Lamborghini file. Here's a second one for 247 from August 24th, 2005. First interview of Ted Lamborghini in Parma Heights, Ohio. Traveled to Cleveland, Ohio today with MSP Detective Gray to interview Theodore Lamborghini, aka Ted Orr. We worked in conjunction with Parma Heights Police Department, Detectives Mockler and Scharschmidt, and established surveillance on Lamborghini's apartment building. After approximately 2.5 hours, he came out, got into a new burgundy Ford pickup, was stopped by Parma Heights PD, and agreed to come to their station for an interview. During the 3-hour interview, Lamborghini admitted his involvement in pedophilia in Detroit in the 70s with Lawson, Tippett, Moore, and Schuler, but stated he had nothing to do with the Oakland County child killings. He did give a couple small inconsistencies. He did, however, agree to come to Michigan and take a polygraph about his involvement in the OCCK case. Occasional pauses are just for water. Excuse me. The polygraph was scheduled with the MSP examiner on September 6, 2005. We also swabbed Lamborghini for DNA. I will hold off on forwarding the DNA swab to the FBI lab until we see the polygraph results. Lamborghini mentioned during the interview that Richard Lawson used to carry a handgun back in the late 70s and that he knew that Richard Lawson burned his own house down on 23rd Street in southwest Detroit back in the late 70s or early 80s for the insurance money. Lamborghini said that he was fairly close with Bob Moore, but didn't really know Bob Schuler, or Big Bob, that well. Lamborghini said that the group of pedophiles gave him the name of Ted Orr back in the 70s, so he used it on the street. Lamborghini went on to say that Bob Moore had molested a lot of young boys in his day. Lamborghini said that he saw a photo album with hundreds of young boys' pictures that Moore had molested in the 70s. Ted said that Moore had a bicycle shop out of a house on Cass Avenue in Detroit. Ted went on to say that he and the others in his group did in fact participate in, quote, Boys' Night Out, which consisted of he and the others picking up young boys, molesting them. Lamborghini said that this usually took place at Lawson's house. Ted asked how Faye was doing, referring to Faye Redacted, who Ted said used to cook for them and the children they brought around the house. Jesus fucking Christ. Talking more about Bob Moore, Ted said that he had never been to Moore's apartment on Henry and thought that he stayed at the home that was his bike shop on Cass. When asked, Lamborghini said that Moore rented other rooms out to people living at the bike shop house. Citation 248. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, March 28, 2007. Prosecutor Rob Moran talked to Lamborghini's attorney today in court prior to Lamborghini's case being called. His attorney, Reedy Young, told Moran that Lamborghini wants to plead guilty to all 15 counts of CSC instead of retaking the polygraph or cooperating the OCCK case with an opportunity to reduce his sentence to possibly 15 years. Very peculiar. Moran had indicated to Ted's attorney that no matter what Ted's level of participation in the killings was, that we could work something out with him, indicating that even if he himself were the killer, we would be willing to negotiate in order to solve the case. Ted turned down every opportunity to help himself out and to clear himself after failing the original polygraph in September 2005. We believe, based on Ted's actions, that he has decided to take his information about the Oakland County child killings to his grave. Ted's sentencing is scheduled in front of Judge Barry on April 20th, 2007. Prosecutor Moran believes Ted will be sentenced to a minimum of 25 to 40 years, which is a life sentence for Ted. We also believe the reason Ted did not want to help himself out and cooperate in the OCCK case is because he does not want to be labeled the Oakland County child killer. Ted can live with being a child molester, but not a murderer. He told detectives during his interview in Ohio after his arrest that he does not want to be labeled a murderer or accessory to murder. It's a label that Ted does not want attached to him. The media, all 3 Detroit stations and newspapers, were all over Ted turning down this offer and pleading guilty to all charges. We released the following to them. The details of the 2 offers made to Ted and the significance of him turning these down. The fact that by no means does this put a halt to our investigation, stating further that we are continuing to investigate Lamborghini and his associates. We also talked about how excited we are because the MSP scientists at the forensics lab in Lansing are currently processing the victims' clothes for DNA and finding DNA material. We told them we are hopeful, but we don't know yet whether the DNA material is from the victims or from the suspects, stating that it will take several months to get an answer back. Citation 248, again, revisiting the crimes from the Detroit Free Press, June 17, 2012. So at the top here, this top portion from the article was kind of running through the possible suspects in the case. You'd see Lamborghini there on the far right. Retired Ford worker serving life sentences for his role in a Detroit pedophile ring in the 70s and 80s. He denied any involvement in the child killings. Then down here, more about Lamborghini. Theodore Lamborghini pleaded to assaults in the Cass corridor. Lamborghini says no to offers in confession. Authorities tried everything to coax Theodore Lamborghini into confessing to the Oakland County child killings. They offered the retired Parma Heights, Ohio auto worker, now 71, a whopping sentence reduction for his role in a pedophile ring that operated in Detroit's Cass corridor in the 1970s and 80s. They offered to send him to a prison of his choice and even give him a new identity so he wouldn't be branded a child molester. But he wouldn't bite. He said he didn't do it, and I don't think he did, recalled retired Berkeley detective Sergeant Ray Anger, who offered some of the deals to Lamborghini. In 2007, Lamborghini pled guilty to sexually assaulting boys in the Cass corridor case. He was sentenced that April to 3 life prison terms. Police said he and his cohorts lured their victims into motel rooms, homes, and the basement of a bicycle shop with food, cash, and drugs. Once there, the group made pornographic movies of the children and sold them in the US and Europe. A member of the ring, Richard Lawson, now 66, who was serving a life prison sentence for the 1989 murder of a cab company owner in Livonia, told authorities that Lamborghini was involved in the child killings. When Wayne County prosecutor Kim Worthy announced Lamborghini's arrest in the Cass corridor case in December 2006, she called him the most promising suspect at this particular time in the child killer case. But Oakland County authorities downplayed her claim. Prosecutors initially offered him 25 to 50 years in prison if he'd take a polygraph in the child killer case. When he refused, they offered him 15 years. He rejected both plea deals. I believe he has information, I really do, and unfortunately he may take it to his grave, State Police Detective Sergeant Gary Gray said at the time. Lamborghini's lawyer, Rita Young, said in 2007 that her client didn't know anything about the killings, had already taken a polygraph exam, and did not want to go through it again. Troy attorney David Binkley sued Lamborghini in October 2007 on behalf of the family of Mark Stebbins, the child killer's first victim. But Binkley said he withdrew the suit when investigators told him Lamborghini wasn't the one. He was being assaulted in prison because of the child molester label, Binkley recalled recently. When I went to see him, I told him I was prepared to make him a very generous offer, the prison of his choice and an alias to avoid the child molester label. He just looked at me and said, I can't tell them what I don't know. Citation 249. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, July 31st, 2007. I returned a phone message today from Kathy Broad King, Timothy King's older sister, who is an attorney living in the Chicago area. Kathy told me that she received some information from a friend of hers that she wanted to relay to me that may be a good lead in her brother's case. She told me that she's been in contact with her brother Chris, who resides in the Detroit area, about this information, and advised her to call Sergeant Williams at Livonia Police Department. I've had the opportunity to meet Chris King a couple of times during the past couple of years while investigating the Ted Lamborghini lead in the OCCK case. Kathy began by telling me that a close friend of hers that she grew up with, named Patrick Coffey, is a private polygraph examiner in the state of California and attended a polygraph examiners convention in Las Vegas approximately a year ago. While at this convention, Coffey struck up a conversation with another examiner attending the conference after noticing the other examiner was from Southfield, Michigan. This other examiner Coffey spoke with is named Lawrence Wasser. Wasser runs a private polygraph business in Southfield, Michigan, and has been a licensed examiner in Michigan since 1975. During this conversation, Coffey began telling Wasser the reason he got into the polygraph business 20 years ago. He told Wasser that he became an examiner because of a close friend and neighbor of his while growing up in Birmingham, Michigan, that was abducted and killed in 1977 named Timothy King. Kathy King stated that Coffey told her that Wasser was visibly stunned and shaken when Coffey talked about his close friend being Timothy King. According to Coffey, Wasser's body language and overall reaction and mood change indicated to Coffey that he had struck a nerve with Wasser when saying the name Timothy King. Kathy told me that Coffey stated to her that Wasser then reminded Coffey of their obligation to the polygraph examiner and client confidentiality privilege, telling Coffey that he polygraphed a guy 30 years ago that confessed to being involved in the Oakland County child killings. Wasser told Coffey that the suspect was brought to his office by the suspect's attorney for a polygraph unrelated to the child killings, at which time the suspect confessed to killing Timothy King. This was, of course, Christopher Bush. Kathy relayed to me that Coffey told her Wasser stated that the suspect is now deceased, and so is his attorney. Kathy also relayed to me that Wasser is supposed to be approximately 60 years old. Citation 250. The case notes of Detective Corey Williams, February 27, 2008. Met with polygraph examiner John Wojnarski, J might be silent, retired MSP today, and he looked at Bush and Green's charts. We had examiner Wojnarski review the charts from Bush and Green's polygraphs today without Wojnarski knowing anything about the case or the polygraphs. After reviewing and numerically scoring the charts, he determined that Green was failing on relevant questions, but that the examiner that conducted the original test in 1977 did not ask Green the relevant questions that he was failing about involvement on the first two charts, on the third chart, like he should have. Wojnarski stated that he did not understand this and stated you have to ask the relevant questions on all three charts, especially when Green was failing on the first two.